Oi, tudo bem? I'm Professor Jason, and welcome to this final lesson in my Jumpstart Brazilian Portuguese series. In today's lesson, we'll explore some basic ideas about Brazilian culture so that you know what to expect when you visit Brazil. We've got plenty to cover, so let's get started. Vamos começar. So when many people think about Brazil, they might think of what I call the three S's: soccer, samba, and soap operas. Some even add a fourth S, Spanish. That's a big no-no, more on that later. It's important to recognize that Brazil is a truly gigantic country with tons of regional, ethnic, racial, socioeconomic, and other kinds of diversity that manifest in all kinds of ways, from food and drink to values and lifestyle habits, music and dance styles, holidays and celebrations, and even the way Portuguese is spoken. Having said that, there are several aspects of culture shared by most Brazilians and typical of their everyday context across the board in this incredible country. So we'll try to focus on these. Just keep in mind that for everything we'll discuss in this lesson, despite the general accuracy and broad applicability, there will always be exceptions. One more thing, sort of a disclaimer, right? Whenever we discuss culture, making comparisons and pointing out differences is unavoidable, even helpful. But rest assured that it's not my intention to imply that anything described in this lesson is inherently better or worse than what folks other places might be used to. All right, so before diving into the content, just a quick overview. My objectives for this lesson is that travelers to Brazil will learn about a few cultural values held by most Brazilians, will understand how those values manifest as behaviors in different contexts, and you'll know what to expect and perhaps how to act in different places that you might find yourselves. In terms of how I'll proceed, the lesson outline, I'm going to start off making some general observations, sort of like most Brazilians are, trying to avoid stereotypes. Then I'll focus on some aspects of communication and interaction in Brazil. Then we'll take a look at cultural things in context, and my approach will sort of be, these are some things you might see as a first-time visitor to Brazil that would be different perhaps if you're an American or a Canadian or even maybe a European. So what to expect, may mix in some recommendations, and then finally I will leave you with a final set of recommendations for your trip to Brazil. Okay, let's start off with some general observations about Brazilian culture. Again, avoiding stereotypes, but I believe that in general, most Brazilians are warm, friendly, hospitable, helpful people who like interacting with foreigners. Brazilians value personal relationships, friendships, and spending time with their families. Brazilians are fairly touchy-feely. There's a lot of physical contact among friends and family, and even just recent acquaintances. Hugs, kisses, pats on the back, that's all very common. And the personal space zone can be very small or almost non-existent in all kinds of contexts in Brazil. So if you're used to your personal space, you won't have as much of that when you visit Brazil. When it comes to concepts like punctuality and timeliness, these in Brazil are de-emphasized. Brazilians are generally not in a hurry and don't like to be hurried, so don't expect people to show up right on time. That means it's okay for you to also be a few minutes late if you have appointments or if you've agreed to meet up with someone, for example. Of course, there are exceptions. You want to be on time for job interviews, business meetings, and other formal things like that. Just be prepared to wait. When it comes to language, Brazilians truly appreciate attempts to speak Portuguese, and they may be offended if you assume it's okay to use Spanish. Brazilians work hard, they play hard, and have lots of days off for holidays. There are federal holidays, religious holidays, regional holidays, and municipal holidays. When it comes to cultural values, Brazilian cultural norms are becoming more progressive. There's more space in Brazilian culture for progressive causes than there once was, but values lean much more traditional than you might expect. And that's in part because of religion. Most Brazilians are religious, and Catholicism is sort of the legacy traditional religion throughout the country. Though there are also several non-Christian religions, including traditional African religions like Candomblé, and the fact that evangelicalism, as in evangelical Christianity, is making fast inroads and taking lots of converts away from Catholicism. So I think the norm in Brazil is more of a sort of religious syncretism, right? Many Brazilians have experimented with different faiths and may believe elements of different traditions. When you're visiting Brazil, I think it's also important to know that Brazilians put a lot of stock in and have very high standards for things like these. First of all, personal appearance. Brazilians take care of their personal appearance. They're very fashion conscious. They like to go to the gym, work out, tone up that physique. They take really good care of their personal hygiene. Brazilians are not going to Walmart in their pajamas at night, right? They're dressing for the occasion. More on this later. When it comes to physical environments, you'll also notice that most indoor spaces and many outdoor spaces have an attractive, modern look. They're clean, they're comfortable, and Brazilians take great pride in having these beautiful, clean, attractive, modern interiors and environments. When it comes to customer service, whether you're in a restaurant, a coffee shop, a clothing store, or anywhere else where people may be waiting on you, Brazilians have extremely high standards for customer service. They expect those people to be attentive, polite, and deferential. Now, on a more negative note, as these images, if you take a close look at them, may suggest, in Brazil, income disparity is acute. So you have conspicuous class distinctions and class consciousness. There is class-based, ethnic, racial forms of discrimination, as well as high levels of poverty, lots of political protests, and street crime, all of which can become violent on occasion. So those were just a few general observations about Brazilian culture. And yes, in general, most Brazilians do enjoy a good samba. Likewise, that second S, soccer, is huge, and most of the country is fairly fanatical about the Brazilian national team and their local teams. Almost all Brazilians enjoy a good soap opera. The caipirinha is part of Brazilian identity, and most Brazilians enjoy a fresh caipirinha. And finally, we have to mention the Brazilian, right, passion for churrasco, Brazilian barbecue, grilled meats. So here we have on this slide, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, we have the three S's, right? Samba, soccer, and soap operas. We've added the caipirinha, national drink, and churrasco, one of the most famous Brazilian dishes. These are things, again, without falling into stereotypes, that really are important and most Brazilians share in common as part of their sense of Brazilian identity. All right, since this entire series on Brazilian Portuguese has emphasized communication in Portuguese, and we're talking about things to be aware of when you visit Brazil, I thought it'd be good to pause on communicating and interacting. And a lot of this information on this slide I took from a great book by Orlando Kelm and David Victor called The Seven C's to Communicating in Brazil, an Intercultural Approach. So if you're really interested in taking a deep dive, look up that book by Kelm and Victor. Okay, so just some things to keep in mind. Brazilians speak Portuguese, not Spanish. I'm going to keep reiterating this, right? Attempts to speak Portuguese are appreciated, so definitely learn a few phrases. Avoid speech patterns that are too direct or concise when communicating with Brazilians, rather in writing, text, email, WhatsApp. Don't be so direct and to the point as you might be with your American colleagues, your Canadian colleagues, your Western European colleagues, because that sort of direct approach may come across as rude. Related to this idea is that in speech and writing, Brazilians tend to express things indirectly and politely, even when they're saying no. And sometimes the no is there, but you have to read between the lines because they don't want to hurt your feelings by, again, being too direct or concise. This idea of the difference between formal and informal context is so important in Brazil because Brazilians tailor not only their dress, their wardrobe, their fashion, but their behavior and their speech patterns to the place and the occasion. So formal Brazilian, very different than a Brazilian in informal contexts. Finally, I want to mention one more thing when it comes to communicating and interacting, and that's the ubiquitous nature of the app WhatsApp, right? The messaging app. In the United States, Canada, Western Europe, maybe we use a lot of SMS texting. In Brazil, it's all WhatsApp, and it's used heavily for all kinds of communication within the family, but also for conducting business. Most businesses have an official WhatsApp telephone number, and that's how they conduct a lot of their business as well. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some culture in context. And remember, my approach here is just going to be maybe to tell you what to expect when you're in different contexts. I might drop in a recommendation or two. So to start us off, the context is when you're out and about, for example, taking public transportation at a market, on the street, in a store, a restaurant. One thing you might notice is that contrary to many places in the United States where we are a car culture, except for some of the bigger cities in the East Coast maybe, you'll see tons of people out and about like you do in this photo. You'll notice a lack of personal space on sidewalks, at markets, public transportation, everywhere. And you may also notice what seems to be a lack of politeness. At least where I live in the Midwestern United States, if somebody bumps into you with their shopping cart or, almost knocks you over, they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, excuse me, I'm so sorry." Those kind of like bumps and things like that, when they happen in Brazil, don't expect the excuse me, don't expect the sorry. They're not being rude, they just don't do that. Of course, one thing you'll notice in the larger cities and even the smaller cities, when you're out and about, you'll see lots of street art, graffiti, political posters. You may see homeless people. You may see, right, the types of things you would see in most large cities in the United States. But again, the streets will be a lot more crowded. Your personal space will be a lot less. You will notice security measures. You'll see gated locations. You may see guards or police officers. You may be asked to show your ID or swipe a card before entering a bank or an ATM, these types of things. So security measures will be noticeable. You'll also see people taking measures to stay safe on the street and in different locations. Just do what they do. Apply some common sense. Another thing you may notice when you're out and about, for example, taking public transportation or waiting in line at the grocery store, is that you'll see special seats, lines, and parking spaces, not only for the elderly, but also for pregnant women, disabled people, people on the autism spectrum, and things like that. You'll encounter lots of open-air markets and street vendors. You may be able to haggle, right, over prices. Don't assume you can do that, but watch what others are doing. When it comes to making payments, you may be asked to pay via Pix, and that's a way to instantly transfer money between bank accounts, kind of like Zelle in the United States or even Venmo. Unfortunately, as a foreigner, unless you have a Brazilian bank account, you will not be able to make a payment via Pix. But you'll see that many people are. If you go to a store, any kind of a store, a restaurant, a coffee shop, again, you'll see those attendants, waiters, giving you very personal attention, more than you're used to perhaps. It kind of weirded me out the first time I went to a clothing store at the mall in Brazil. The attendant followed me around everywhere, made suggestions, very specific suggestions, walked me back to the fitting room, brought me things to the fitting room that I hadn't even picked out. So just be prepared, it's a little bit different. Sticking with our out and about cultural context, but focusing more on the dining out experience, and I do have a separate video about this. One thing you'll notice about Brazilians is that they do take their time when dining out. It's not a race, right? And restaurants understand that, and they don't rush parties when they're at a restaurant or a bar. So if you get an invitation to go out to dinner after a business meeting or something like that, plan to be there for a while. It's not going to be 45 to 60 minutes. It might be a couple hours or longer. And that's okay with the establishments. They're not trying to rush you out the door. When folks order food and drink, they're usually not just planning to eat it and drink it themselves. They want to share it with their colleagues, with their friends and family members. So you'll see people sharing entrees, getting those large beers and sharing them, pouring them into smaller cups and things like that. So always offer to share your food with your colleagues. You'll see Brazilians using their utensils, knife in the right hand, fork in the left, European style, even for foods like pizza, hamburgers, some fruits, things that Americans might just grab with their hands and eat with their hands. Brazilians will use their utensils. Also European style, Brazilians keep their hands and wrists visible above the table when dining. So don't put your hands in your lap, keep them above the table. Now it's polite to offer to pay, but let the person who invites or who organized the meal pay. Separate checks or splitting out the check is not really a thing most places. Don't get into this back and forth. No, let me pay. No, I'll pay. No, let me pay. Just offer and then let the other person pay. um, you'll see people calling waiters from across the room. In fact, this is necessary. If you want, to order something else or if you want the bill, you have to call the waiter. Otherwise, you will be sitting there all night. They don't stop by like those annoying American waiters. How's everything tasting, guys? Can I get you anything? Are you ready for your check? No. You have to call them over with a hand or head motion, eye contact, right? Calling them vocally, verbally from across the room. Oi, amigo, campeón, opa, whatever, to get their attention. Speaking of tipping, it doesn't happen in Brazilian restaurants, in Brazilian taxis, not even very much in Brazilian hotels. If you're at a restaurant, a service charge of 10% will usually be added to your bill. No additional tip is expected. All right, switching to a different cultural context, that of getting around, transportation, keep in mind that Brazil is truly gigantic, roughly the size of the continental United States. So if you have meetings or engagements, commitments in multiple, parts of the country, plan to fly, right? So if you're going to be in Rio de Janeiro, and then you're going to Brasilia, and then you're going to Fortaleza, right? Plan to fly. If you have more time, the interstate or intercity bus travel is very reliable and comfortable. This first image on this slide is a photo of sort of the sleeper buses that you can take. So I encourage that. It's a comfortable way to travel. I say comfortable, but look at the next point. Highway quality is hit and miss. So there's a lot of potholes. There's a lot of curvy roads. And if you're driving, just be aware that there are some toll roads, quite a few toll roads if you're driving. Speaking of driving in Brazil is not for the faint of heart. If you've never driven in a foreign country, I don't recommend it. You're going to see, whether you're in a taxi, an Uber, or you're driving yourself, if you pay attention, you're going to see some pretty aggressive driving, especially by the motorcycles. On this image, you can see they definitely split the lanes there, which is perfectly legal. So be prepared. As a pedestrian, be extremely careful when crossing the street, because even if you're in a crosswalk, if the light's green, nobody's stopping. You could be hit by a car very easily. So if you plan to cross the street, make sure the light is red for traffic and traffic is stopped, okay? Speaking of traffic in major cities, just like any major city anywhere in the world, but places like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro can have monster, mega traffic jams, which can cause delays, so be prepared. If you're traveling short distances within one city, of course, there are taxis and ride shares like Uber, and those are perfect. The taxis are pretty reliable. Some countries you may go, taxi service might be a little bit sketchy. They may try to take advantage of tourists. In Brazil, this really is not the case. Taxis are equipped with meters. You don't need to make small talk with the taxi driver, and you also don't need to tip your taxi driver. Just get in. Let the person know where you want to go, right? You may ask a question about the potential cost, but beyond that, there's no need to make small talk with the driver, and you do not tip at the end of the ride. The safest way to catch a taxi is to call ahead or to find one of these taxi stands, like in the first image on this slide. Of course, when you're out in traffic, like in any big city, you may see folks kind of walking around in traffic when it's stopped, washing windows, selling snacks, and drivers engage with these vendors. Once parked, if you're driving, you may be asked for money by someone offering to keep an eye on your parked car to keep it safe. Just pay that person to do their job. You won't be sorry. It is a common practice in Brazil. All right, on to our next context, at the beach. And Brazil has many, many truly amazing, beautiful beaches. Some things you'll notice. Beach attire is skimpy and revealing by American standards, right? So you see the very, very skimpy bikinis, and you also see the guys, even middle-aged to older men, wearing Speedos, kind of letting it all hang out, as it were. But one thing is that Brazilians, again, that difference between knowing how to dress for the location, for the occasions. Brazilians leave their swimwear at the beach. They don't walk into the hotel, a nearby restaurant, or shop in their bikini, in their Speedos, right? Women will cover up. The men will also, right, put on a shirt and pants to go into establishments. So leave the swimwear at the beach. You won't see many beach towels. You can see in this first image here, the woman is using something known as a canga, which is a light, just sort of blanket-like thing that you lay down on the beach, and you can also like sort of turn it into part of your wardrobe. Anyways, Google canga. You'll see much more of these than towels, or maybe a beach mat, right? But you don't see a lot of like beach towels. Just saying. Brazilians, speaking of that, tend to pack very light for the beach. So they'll take their canga, they might grab a soccer ball or a frisbee, and a little bit of cash. They will not take valuables to the beach, but they might take a little cash because in this bottom image, as you can see, there are lots of vendors up and down the beach constantly walking by selling snacks, drinks, craft items, sunscreen, hats, beach chairs, cangas, anything that you can think of that you might need at the beach, you can purchase at the beach. All right, just a couple other observations about the beach. I think I already mentioned, do not take any valuables or leave items unattended at the beach. You really can't, if you're used to going to the beach on the eastern seaboard of the United States where you can, leave your stuff on your towel, your backpack, your bag, your phone and things like that and go in for a dip and not give it a second thought. That is not the case in Brazil. You need to be extremely careful. Incidents of theft are extremely common. So don't even take valuables to the beach. Like I said, maybe take a little bit of cash and never leave your things unattended. There are lots of these, like you can see in the first image, sort of beachside restaurants or bars that will let you as a paying customer use their chairs and their umbrellas. They're great. I really like this kind of beach experience at Brazil. You just grab one of the umbrellas, the chairs, you sit down, someone will come by to ask you what you want to eat or drink. Now, beaches in Brazil can be very crowded, especially during the summer or on holidays. So again, that notion of almost no personal space, no boundaries, be ready to hear everybody else's music, right? Beaches are popular and very crowded. Now, there are sections of beach where you may not see a lot of people. That means you shouldn't go there. Avoid deserted sections of beach, especially after dark, if you don't want to make yourself a target for crime. All right, let's talk about another context, and that is the context of business, commerce, these types of activities. It's often said that in Brazil, you negotiate with people, not companies, meaning that personal relationships are very important. Initial business meetings in Brazil can be quite formal and traditional, so be sure to dress and act accordingly. Be on time, but again, be prepared to wait and keep a flexible outlook regarding appointments. So if you have a business meeting with a company in Brazil and you're going to make a pitch and it starts at 10 o'clock, get there at 10 o'clock. Don't be surprised if they come out and greet you at 10:20. And don't have a meeting scheduled for 12:30 because you might get invited to lunch and end up hanging out with them all day. That's what I mean by being flexible. Small talk is important in Brazilian business, building relationships, right? Personal relationships truly matter. Back to that first point, you negotiate with people, not companies. So be patient and make an effort to build genuine relationships, genuine friendships with potential business partners. Many a deal has been struck over a lunch meeting or a dinner meeting or a happy hour. Brazilian companies and businesses certainly use email communication to conduct a lot of business. Those communications might come off as sounding a little bit less formal than you may be accustomed to. And remember, the use of the WhatsApp messaging app for business is widespread. So don't be surprised if a business partner adds you on WhatsApp and attempts to conduct business via WhatsApp. Be mindful of the fact that Brazil is a gigantic country with many different large cities and different regions, and that there are differences in all kinds of culture, including business etiquette and practices among the regions. So what's normal in Rio de Janeiro might not be the norm in Brasilia or São Paulo or, Salvador. Brazilians are extremely skilled at finding creative solutions, workarounds, and shortcuts that often make use of exchanges of favors, even off the books transactions, and personal relationships. So this sort of creative, right, problem solving is called o jeitinho, or dar jeito, right? Just be aware that there are some informal ways of getting things done in Brazil. But on the legal side of things, right, business transactions and any legal processes involving government agencies do involve a lot of bureaucracy. So you may spend time at notaries. You have to have certified translations of documents and things like that. So just be prepared, again, to wait, because these bureaucratic activities can take a lot of time, patience, and energy. All right, enough about business. Let's talk about friends and family. Now, as mentioned before, personal relationships, friendships, acquaintanceships, is that a thing, are often quite touchy-feely by American standards. So I have the image of the two women greeting each other with a kiss. This is very common throughout Brazil, even when you're first introduced to somebody, especially in a more of a friend or family context, not necessarily a business context. In business, you would certainly shake hands. But if you're introduced to somebody more in a friend context, after hours, you're going to receive a kiss, at least one kiss on one cheek, maybe one kiss on both cheeks. It's totally normal. Brazilians show their friends more affection than you may be used to. So again, lots of hugs, kisses, horsing around, back slaps, those types of things. Very touchy-feely. Families in Brazil are extended, multi-generational, large, and quite close. Adult children may live at home with parents into their 30s or beyond, typically until they marry. So it's not common. It's not as common as it is in the United States and Canada, for example, for a child to be 19, 20 years old, go off to university, and live on their own. Most adult children live at home with their parents or with a relative, again, into their 30s or until they marry. Family gatherings on weekends and holidays are extremely common. And you may be invited to a churrasco. That's one of those backyard family barbecues. And if you are, you should definitely accept, because it will be a good time. Keep in mind, you don't have to show up right on time, and you shouldn't show up empty-handed. Bring some beer, bring a bottle of wine, at least ask if you can bring something. And it's not uncommon for Brazilians to split, especially among friends, to split the costs of a churrasco. So you may be told in advance what to bring or how much you're on the hook for. So if you make some friends in Brazil and you spend any time around their families, you're likely to observe some of the things on this slide about the family dynamic and communication in Brazil. Communication among family members and even friends, even on seemingly sensitive topics like personal appearance or relationship status, things like that, may be quite direct. Friends and family in Brazil don't necessarily respect personal boundaries, and they may ask you quite personal questions or share things that you think are very personal. Tolerance for family drama and conflict is also high, right? So there's a lot of conflict in families, right? It breaks out all the time. But people tend to get over those grudges and make up fairly quickly. All right, as usual, this lesson is getting fairly long. You know, I like to be thorough, but I thought it was interesting to look at some of those cultural things in different contexts. Let's finish up with some final recommendations. Remember that Brazil is gigantic and incredibly diverse in every way. Don't forget to learn as much Portuguese as possible before you go. Do not rely on Spanish to get you through. Learn some Portuguese. I think I made an entire 30-part video series that can help you with that. Do learn about Brazilian history and politics. You want to be informed, but resist the urge to criticize or question the way things are. Whenever you're traveling, it's really bad form to criticize the culture, the politics, the history of the place you're visiting. The locals can do that, you cannot. So be humble, be curious, and be open-minded. It's okay to ask Brazilians what they think. Don't be in a hurry and don't over-plan. Remember, a lot of visiting Brazil is hurry up and wait. So relax and enjoy yourself. Keep your schedule flexible. Don't spend all your time at the marvelous, incredible beaches all over Brazil. Save some time to visit museums, restaurants, open-air markets, go to shows, visit other natural attractions, and the like. Take some common sense security precautions, but don't be irrationally afraid or intimidated. Get out and experience Brazil. All right, that's it for this final lesson in the series. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it to be informative and useful. If so, please hit the like button, drop me a comment, and share this video lesson with others. Don't forget to add and follow me on social media for updates, and be sure to come back to the Professor Jason channel again soon. See you next time. Até breve. Ciao.